It's the 1980s and you're looking to buy a brand new car. You're on a budget, but don't want to go the used route, you want to be the first owner. Of course, we aren't in the 80s, but it still is interesting to look at what those options once were. I compiled a list of the top 10 cheapest American cars from the 1980s. Before we get on with the first entry, I should clarify just a few things. I got most of my numbers from this Michigan Department of State website, but then again, prices vary from state to state. The numbers I will be presenting will be adjusted for inflation using this calculator and inputting 2024. Also, I rounded numbers. Some entries could potentially be interchangeable, and I just go over the American options. But don't worry, I'll include some cars from the Euro and Japanese market as they offered plenty of options as well. If you've been watching me for any length of time, then you know that I rarely mention the other markets, and so I wanted to include them for this video. I think I've drawn out this intro long enough. Let's get on with the number 10 spot. 1983 AMC Spirit DL Liftback. 1983 would also mark the end for the Spirit, and only around 3,400 units were produced. There were two trim options and one body style available. The two trims were DL and GT. DL stood for down low, at least according to this person's comment in a forum. Previously, consumers could pay extra for the two-door sedan Camback, but for 83, that was no longer available. The 1983 AMC Spirit DL started at around $5,995, which in today's money is around $19,300. The GT package would cost you an additional $500 on top of that. The AMC Spirit, in my opinion, was a decent option if you wanted an affordable little car. At least when new. If you got this car handed down to you in the 90s or something, it may have been a clunker. There's the AMX that was offered for a few years, of course the GT that competed with some Mustangs, and the base DL. There was also the AMX Turbo Pace car that made 450 horsepower, but I'll save that for another day. What we need to do is go over this DL trim and see exactly what you got for your money. Standard came the 4.2 inline-6, made it into a 4-speed manual, which is exclusive to 83 DL models. Up until this point, they came standard with GM's 2.5 Iron Duke. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to find a brochure that listed these standard options for the 83 DL, but I need to get on with the next entry anyway. Also in 1983 was the introduction of the first generation Ford Ranger. A standard trim Ranger set buyers back around $5,900, which in today's money is about $19,000. GM did beat Ford to the punch with the S10, Chrysler had their Rampage, and this was a turning point for the compact truck. At least in the domestic market, because before they were mainly imports. Ford had the Courier, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly, GM with the Love, and Chrysler with the D50. For 1983, the Ranger had four trims: Standard, XL, XLT, and XLS. XLS was the sporty option, XLT was the luxury option, and I use the word luxury lightly here, and XL was the entry-level trim. Standard models came with Ford's 2-liter Lima engine made into a 4-speed manual. 0 to 60, if you were wondering, was tested at 14.8 seconds without a load. With a load is close to 20 seconds, and obviously this was not important to anyone who bought these new. Speaking of new, I wanted to build and price a 2024 Ranger just for and giggles. We are greeted with four options: XL, XLT, Lariat, and Raptor. 1983 had Standard, XL, XLT, and XLS. We see that the XL starts at $32,980. On screen are photos of the XL, and I did not add any options whatsoever. I think it's a decent looking truck with nice features, but out the door, with dealer markups and taxes, it's pretty expensive in my opinion. You could argue that the Maverick is more similar on paper to the Ranger, at least in terms of size. The Maverick XL starts at $26,395, which is in fact better. To the right is the all-new Maverick Lobo, sort of like this performance street truck. What do you all think of it? I think they're asking way too much money for it, but it's interesting, and I'll leave it at that. At number 7 is the 1985 Chevy Spectrum 2-door hatch with a starting price of around $6,300. During the mid-80s, GM had a few captive imports in their lineup. There was the Nova, a rebadged Corolla, there was the Sprint, and the Spectrum, both of which were rebadged Isuzus. Then in 89 came Geo, but these were essentially the predecessors to that subdivision. To address the elephant in the room, yes, these cars aren't technically American, and there's more non-American entries, but who really cares? I made a video about 3 months back about the cheapest American cars from the 90s, and there was no way I was going to leave out the Metro. The upbringing of this car is quite fascinating, and while we don't have the time for all of that, there is one aspect I wanted to share with you all. Giorgio, and I apologize for that pronunciation, is a well-known Italian designer, and he was involved in the project. As time went on, this and that happened, and eventually Isuzu sent over the final design to GM. GM ordered multiple changes to be done without ever consulting with Giugiaro. Again, I'm really sorry for that pronunciation. He was heavily insulted by this and never collaborated with Isuzu ever again. He was so insulted that he denied the design was his until 10 years after the vehicle went out of production. I feel as if I talked about everything other than about the actual car itself, but if I do now, this entry will be too long. Number 7 is another captive import. It's the 1980 two-wheel drive Chevy LUV. This truck just makes the list as these first generations were discontinued right after 1980. These set buyers back around $4,600, which in today's money is about $18,700. LUV stands for light utility vehicle, and that's exactly what this thing was used for. Little Isuzu single overhead cam 1.8 liter that made around 80 horsepower made into a 4-speed manual. Base models didn't come with much, but that is to be expected. No AC, no right-hand mirror, which was pretty common, no AM/FM radio, vinyl bench seat, manual windows, but you did get color-keyed seatbelts. This wasn't a truck for comfort at all, but that's totally fine. These were nice little work trucks that were affordable and good on gas. The EPA rated them at 23 miles per gallon city and 33 miles per gallon highway. Come 1980, these were about ready to go in favor for the all-new S10, and those were built in-house, unlike the LUV. One bonus entry goes to the 1987 Renault Alliance two-door sedan. These set buyers back around $18,200 in today's money. The Alliance was the outcome of Renault and AMC's collaboration back in the day. At first, they were selling very well, but eventually sales started to dip. Renault wanted out of the US market, sold their AMC share to Chrysler, and Chrysler bought out AMC. There was a moment where Chrysler was selling these, and in their final year, around 30,000 units sold. Also, in 1987, saw the introduction of the Alliance GTA, sort of this last-ditch effort to boost sales. I think these look really cool, and will definitely feature it sometime in the future. In 1980, consumers could still get themselves a brand new Chevy Monza for the last time. These were introduced in 1975 on GM's H-body platform along with its division cousins. Over 700,000 Monzas sold over its production run and would get replaced by the very successful Cavalier a year later. At one point, you could opt in for a 305 or 350, but come its final year, those options were long gone. And I take that back, the 350 was only an option in California. Standard models came with the 2.5 Iron Duke made into a 4-speed manual, and as you would expect, these were quite anemic. There was development and plans to have a rotary engine in these, which would have been very interesting, but mainly due to emissions, they were cancelled. No AC, no power brakes, no power steering, no radio, wheel covers, no electric clock, no tachometer, the list goes on. But these were super affordable with a base price of around $3,700, which in today's money is about $16,900. This car and the next entry are probably some of the worst options on this list, mainly just because they were designed in the mid-70s. If you're looking for a cheap car in the 80s, there were just far better options, and safer too. The Ford Pinto, as well, could be bought in 1980, which is also its final production year as well. Do you want to guess how many units still sold even after its 10th year on the market? Maybe 50,000? 70,000? It has to be under 100,000 units, right? I mean, this car was pretty outdated in 1980, and yet Ford still somehow squeezed out over 185,000 Pintos. What? Even after its reputation went in the toilet, 2 huge lawsuits due to fatality for both cases, it did not matter, people still bought these. The only redeeming factor, at least to me, is the fact that these were dirt cheap. They started at around $4,100, which in today's money is around $16,700. If I had a guess, and this is with all final year models, they were marked down by dealers, trying to get rid of that inventory so they can replace it with the new and improved stuff. It's the Ford Pinto. If you know, you know. I don't want to waste any more time on these, as our next entry was a far better option in my opinion. 1986 Dodge D50 with two-wheel drive, aka the Plymouth Arrow, aka the Mitsubishi Mighty Max. 1986 would be the last year for these first gens, and that is why they were very cheap. They started at around $5,800, which in today's money is around $16,670. I said the Pinto was $16,700 in 2024 dollars. These for sure can be interchangeable on this list with such a narrow gap. Just like the Chevy LUV, not many options came standard in these, but to some people that doesn't or didn't matter. This is another captive import that was super affordable and made a decent little work truck. I was looking for footage of these and came across a past auction of an 86 D50, and I think it was a great deal. 4x4, 5-speed manual, good on gas, 1-inch lift, clean title, only 62,000 miles, and it sold for $7,800. Now this was the Power Ram version, which came standard with 4x4, the base models did not. The States received the second generation as well, and was sold alongside with the Dakota. What's bizarre, and I didn't know this, maybe you did, but they were sold up until 1994. These trucks were beat to hell, and finding one in good condition is almost impossible. There's only 3 reported listings on Bring a Trailer, and one of them only had 7,000 miles on it. It's the same story with the Monza and the Pinto. The infamous AMC Pacer was still available in 1980. Either you love or hate the design of these, or you're one of those people that find it so ugly that you can't help but to like it. Come 1980, consumers could still get the wagon variant, but the cheaper option was the DL hatchback. They started at around $4,000, which in today's money is around $16,400. They came standard with these style wheel covers, electric clock, and option on the Monza, cigarette lighter, which had been used in most of these, but like the Monza, power nothing, no AC or radio, no dome light, not even a locking gas cap. There were lots of different models and concepts for the Pacer: the X, the Levi's Edition, the Stinger, the AM Concept Van, the Crowned, and a few others. These for sure made a lasting impact in the car world both then and now. One of the main reasons for their cancellation was due to the imports just getting better fuel economy. Remember I brought up the Renault Alliance? Well, one of their collaborations birthed the Renault 5, or Le Car, and these replaced them. The second cheapest American car from the 1980s is the 1984 Dodge Colt E 2-door. This is the third generation for the Colt, aka the Champ, aka the Mitsubishi Mirage. Little 1.4 liter making 64 horsepower, made into a 4-speed manual, nothing crazy, but they did achieve over 50 miles per gallon on the highway. For a car to do that in the early to mid 80s is actually pretty impressive. 1982 saw the introduction of the 5-door models, which were slightly more expensive than the 3 doors. Additionally, in 1984, its final year, a new trim was added, GTS Turbo. The 4G32 in higher trim models was now turbocharged and made 102 horsepower and 122 pound-feet of torque. For some reason, I just love the look of these cars, and while they aren't fast off the straight line, owners say they are a blast to drive.
There it is.
Earlier in the video, I said I mentioned some of the imports, and I will go ahead and do that now. All these models are corresponding to the year 1984. 2-door Volkswagen Rabbit L with the diesel made into a 4-speed manual started at around $6,400. The Nissan Sentra 2-door sedan with the 5-speed started at around $5,200. The 2-door Toyota Tercel base started at around $5,100. And lastly, the Mazda GLC 2-door hatch basic started at a hair under $5,000. The cheapest American car from the 1980s goes to the 1987 Chevy Chevette CS 3-door. 1987 would also mark the end for the Chevette name after being on the market for over 10 years. Dealers had to have been giving these out for free because these were so behind from everything else on the market. The Chevette was number 1 in another top 10 video I made a while back, and well, not for good reason. It was the number 1 slowest American car from the 1980s, or its brother, the U1000 was. 1.6 liter made into a 3-speed automatic was tested at over 30 seconds to hit 60. I completely understand that speed was never the purpose for these cars, but 30 seconds is just flat out dangerous. Yes, these were super cheap, but come 1987, there were just so many better options from GM alone. The Cavalier, for example, 87 would mark the end for those first gens, but even still, they weren't designed in the 70s. Now, if you really know your stuff, then you'd realize that I actually messed up this entire list. The 1985 Chevy Sprint 2-door started at around $5,200, which in today's money is around $15,500, making it on par with the Colt. I realized this and wanted to include the AMC Spirit instead for 1, it's AMC, one of my favorite brands, 2, it was built in-house, and 3, I like them better. There was a Sprint Turbo model, which are kinda cool, but I plan on making a video with it sometime in the future. And there you have it, the top 10 cheapest American cars from the 1980s. Some of you watching had these cars, and feel free to drop any personal stories or whatever you have in the comments down below. Not only are you helping other viewers, but you're also helping me out, since I wasn't even around during this time. Thank you to the viewers that made it up until this point. Hearing me yap for over 15 minutes isn't for the faint at heart. I plan on making this exact type of video, but for the 2000s, which would really give perspective of how prices are nowadays. I believe I mentioned I'd be making 3 or 4 videos in the future in this one video, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. I have an entire binder full of video ideas that I got from my smooth brain and also from you guys. 2025 is going to be a great year for this channel, and I'm very excited to grow and make better quality videos. That is going to wrap it up for this week's video. Happy holidays, enjoy the rest of your week, and I will try to see you all next week.